The enemies are bread. That's one of my favorite Bible slams. And it comes from when Moses sent out the 12 spies, right? And 10 of them came back and said, oh no, we can't go into this land. There's all these reasons, right? And two of them, Caleb and Joshua, came back and said, bread, right? And ultimately, as I think about bread, where in this video, which has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, I'm thinking about Egypt, where there is a famine going on, and it's been going on for years, and a lot has actually happened because there's this guy who is right underneath the Pharaoh, right, real high up there. His name is Joseph, and he saw this famine coming. The Lord actually let him know. So what he did was, for a number of years, he allowed this Egypt to kind of store some food up, so that when the famine hits, which was going to go on for about 7 years, he was able to dole out the food. And then on top of that, some other stuff that Joseph did, which was a real advantage, right? Because people needed food and they had to pay for the food. So when they couldn't pay for the food after like the first few years, then he asked for cattle. So then the Pharaoh would get their cattle, and then they would get their land, and then they would move into the cities. So ultimately, like, Joseph was this great project manager, right? Because by the end of the time, the Pharaoh not only increased the people in his cities, but the lands and the cattle, and they didn't starve. So ultimately, it all became really well, and that was all due to this project manager, Joseph. And it happens to be that Jacob, who is now Israel, has some sons, right? And they need some food during this famine. So they've come out to Egypt and they see Joseph. Now, what they don't know is that this isn't their first time meeting Joseph. Joseph is actually their brother, who they told their dad was killed, right? He had a technicolor coat, and then he was sold into slavery. And it was through his own circumstances, he found God and stayed on God, and God brought him up to the level of where he's at. So Joseph, when he sees his brothers, he actually puts them through a little bit of a test. He ends up kind of asking for some things, sends them back to their dad a few times. But ultimately, he reveals himself to his father and to his brothers, and he brings them in, and using cattle in the same way, he sort of project manages it so that the Pharaoh sees them in favor, and really it all works out for their family. And Joseph thereby takes care of not only who he serves in the Pharaoh, but also in the people, and then ultimately also in his own family. And really, he serves God, right? And so it comes at the end that Joseph has two sons. The Pharaoh at some point let him get married and gave him a wife. And so he brings those sons to his father, Israel, who's going to do a blessing. And it happens to be that Israel puts his hand on the youngest son, his right hand, and then he puts his left hand on the other son. And right then, Joseph goes, wait, you got to reverse those. This one's the younger son. And Israel says no, right? And it really recalls to me once when Israel was Jacob, and when a blessing and a younger son and an older son came into play. And what Israel says to Joseph is, he says, this younger son, whose name is Ephraim, he's going to have a great nation. He's going to be blessed, and his position is going to be above his older brother. And that's the blessing. And Israel does that, and sure enough, if you look in history, that's what happens. And next what's going to happen is that Israel blesses all of his sons, and that's going to take us to what I call the end of the first dynasty in the Bible. So from Abraham and Sarah to Rebekah and Isaac, to Jacob and all of his sons, to Joseph and his two sons, reuniting the family, taking care of Egypt and serving the Pharaoh, brings us all back to where Abraham and Sarah stood before a Pharaoh and were sent out with Hagar on their journey. It's a full circle dynasty in the Bible, and it all has to do with famine and food and the bread from the Lord, right? And that's all about what the Lord provides for us, because nothing is going to come against us when the Lord is for us. Our enemies are bread. I have no idea where that came from. All right, happy Sunday. Chatting at Cheesman. Happy Sunday.